Hi there, this is Mr. Fowles, and we're going to be talking about early colonies. Now, these are specifically early English colonies. Before the time we're talking about, Spain and France had already set up some colonies, but we are focusing here on English colonies, and we'll talk about why. So here's some Bellwork. Where was the first English settlement? And to answer this question, you have to look at this timeline. And a timeline, proceeds from left to right, and the dates get later. So to find the earliest, you have to go to the left. And you have to read and find out which one is a colony. And you can do that here real quick. You can pause. And the answer is Roanoke here, 1585. And we're going to talk about that. It's the unsuccessful colony. It's kind of interesting. Here are your notes. Sir Walter Raleigh, mercantilism, Jamestown, John Smith, headright, indentured servant, House of Burgesses. And you're going to take notes here, the benefits of a colony and the risks of a colony. And you just want to kind of think about that. And our essential question is, how did the first English colony start, flourish, and perhaps perish? Which means to go away. And in a very real sense, this is where real American history begins, because we're talking about things that occur on the continent from English settlers. And since we speak English in this country, even though it's somewhat ethnocentric to think this way, that the English colonies are the most important, that's the curricular view, is that the English colonies start everything, and since we're descended from Englishmen, blah blah blah. So here's the first colony that we talked about in 1585, founded by Sir Walter Raleigh, and he funded it independently. So he put in a lot of cash, and in 1585 he set something up, but weather was bad, they had to turn back, it didn't work. So they tried again in 1587, and when somebody went back to check on that one, John White, he'd gone back in 1590 to check on it, and this is what he wrote. He wrote that we found the houses taken down and the place very strongly enclosed with a high fence of great trees, and one of the chief trees had bark taken off, and 5 foot from the ground in fair capital letters was carved Croatoan, I don't know how to pronounce that, Croatoan, without any cross or sign of distress. So this is all they had, was just, they went to the side of the colony and they found Croatoan carved into the bark. So it's kind of a fascinating idea, but nobody really knows what happened. It's kind of lost. So it was not the first permanent colony, but it was the first colony. Which Raleigh there, since he funded it independently, a later model was called a joint stock company, right here in red. And a joint stock company is when a bunch of people buy in to buy shares, because colonies, as we know, were used to generate profits through the process of mercantilism. We're going to talk about that in a second here. So people invested in colonies just like modern people invest in companies. A colony was in very many ways just like a company. And here's how they made money. The colonies generated these raw materials, and they sent them over to England. And then England took these raw materials, they made goods, and they sold them back to the colonies. So the colonies served two purposes. First, they provided cheap raw materials that England didn't have to buy from anywhere else. And then it served as a market for English finished goods. So this was really good for England, because they got all this cheap stuff and they had a pre-made market. They could control who the colonists could buy from. And at the expense of the colonies didn't really have much autonomy in this process. They couldn't, for example, create the goods themselves, or they couldn't find anyone else to sell to for a better price. They were kind of tied to the modern country, to the mother country. So they wasn't a really good deal. So here's a think pair. How did mercantilism drive colonies? So you can stop and think about that and discuss it. That would be nice. So here's the process of colonization for dummies. 1, you identify a land parcel, a place where you want to go. 2, you're going to attract investors. 3, you need to apply for a charter. And this is from the king. He's got to give you permission to set up a colony in the name of England. And once he gives you a charter, which has rules in it, so they serve almost as a fundamental constitution. Then you get on a boat and you set sail, off you go. Then you have to survive. which, as we will find out, was problematic. Well, we found that out from Roanoke. It's hard to survive in a new country where you don't know how to survive. And then you generate profits for England, for your the people who granted you your charter. And in exchange for that, maybe you can make some money on the side, but you are still quite limited by the English throne. So this is kind of where they settled, and I've got a more live version here. So if this is the East Coast, these are modern states, of course, and roads, which did not exist then. So we can go to satellite. So there's North America, and this here, this little red dot, this is Roanoke, the lost colony of Roanoke. And if we turn this back on, this is actually called the Croatan Sound. So we got some historical naming conditions anyway. And then up to the north slightly is where Jamestown was founded. And we're going to talk about Jamestown. Of course, none of these roads were there. And if we zoom in, we can see these houses, of course, were not there at the time. Well, so I thought that'd be a good way to give you some ideas as to what where these were settled. So Jamestown was the first permanent colony, and it was settled in 1607 and named after English king James I. And by 1608, and this was from a joint stock company called the Virginia. Let me get the name. The Virginia Company of London. So this is, they sailed in, and they sailed in here. This is Chesapeake Bay, and this is the James River. Well, now it's called the James River. And they set up Jamestown, which was a. Let me see if I refresh this. I might be able to go full screen again. And they started a colony with 100 settlers, but within a year. There we go. Within a year, only 38 of them were still alive. That shouldn't be a question mark. Question mark should be there. Why do you think maybe only 38 colonists were still alive? Well, an answer could be that they were unfamiliar with the terrain. It was a harsh winter. It was really bad. Then this fella named John Smith took control. He was a bold fella, and he got order back to the colony, so it said. But then there was he went back to England for a minute, and while he was gone, what was called the starving time for Jamestown. They were really suffering. They pushed through a little bit, and they got some relief in 1610, but nothing was really good. There was a tribe, the Powhatan tribe, traded corn to help them survive, but Native American-English relations were not exactly friendly until she came along, Pocahontas. And this is her dressed up in English dress. She married this guy named John Rolfe, and he was a colonist, and that helped bridge the two civilizations, the Powhatan tribe and Jamestown colony. She unfortunately died shortly after in England because she and her husband were off trying to raise awareness and try to get some money for the colony. So there's a question: how did Pocahontas affect the success of Jamestown? And the answer is she helped the Native American tribe, the Powhatan tribe. She helped bridge the gap between the two. But then her husband here, John Rolfe, exported the first cash crop of the English colonies, and this is a picture of it. So if you can take a guess as to what this plant is. It was the first major cash crop of the English colonies. It was tobacco. And it was a very viable cash crop for the area. It grew very well. And John Rolfe exported the first batch and became wildly popular. And back on that map, which I'm kind of hesitant to show you, but I will, this whole river became bounded by tobacco farms because they could use the river to ship the stuff directly to England. So they used the geography to help maintain their colony because they had direct access there. And this is the problem again. So we're going to refresh. And there we go. But so you can see there how having the river, which we now call the James River, was very important for the colony. And so they attracted new people by offering head rights, which are just land grants if you could pay your own way to get to Virginia. If you were an English person and you wanted to come to Virginia, you could get this head right, 50-acre land grant, have your farm, start going, generate profits for England, and eventually become wealthy in your own right. But if you could not purchase your own way, you could come over as an indentured servant. And this was a corollary to slavery, because if you were an indentured servant, you didn't pay for your own way. You got sponsored to come over, but you had to work for your freedom. And some Africans came over as indentured servants, some came over as enslaved individuals, but some Europeans came over as indentured servants and worked just like anyone else. So we have this influx of English people, and more people, you have more problems. They want to govern themselves. They want self-government. So they, the colonists were allowed to create this House of Burgesses, and it was like a little local government. They could pass local laws and raise taxes. And what is the modern equivalent of the House of Burgesses? I want you to think about that. And if you came up with Congress, or any kind of governing body, you're on the right track. Oh, but there is always conflict. Conflict shapes a lot of history. And here we see an English boat, and here we see is a Powhatan fella looking at it. This is from a film. And what happened is the Powhatan tribe were witnessing this growth of the English colony, and a lot of the land being taken up for tobacco plantation farming, which is different from subsistence farming, where you grow just enough for yourself. Remember, cash crops use the land to simply generate wealth, not to provide for the owner. So there was an uprising in 1622 where 1/4 of the English population was killed. And the king, King James, as a result of this uprising, he revoked their charter, and he turned Jamestown into a royal charter colony, a royal colony, whereby he had direct control. There was no local governance, it was just a royal colony. But there's good news. King James died, and his son reassembled the House of Burgesses, and some sense of democracy was restored to Jamestown, in whatever capacity. And there's ways that that sense of democracy was challenged later on and led to revolution, but we will discuss that in a later video. So I want you to, that's if you're in my class, so I want you to, let's go back here and think, how did the first English colonies start, flourish, and perish? Well, some of them started with independent ventures, some were joint stock ventures. They were founded on this idealism of being able to go to a new land and make some money, actually. And we'll talk a little bit later how they also, the northern colonies, were founded for different reasons, but these first colonies were started pretty much just to generate profits through mercantile exchange. And then they flourished because of the tobacco industry. The tobacco export industry made great deals of money for all those involved, but they could perish because they did not really maintain good relations with local Native American tribes. And that was a problem for Roanoke and Jamestown in different capacities. Okay, so I hope you learned a little bit about how the early colonies have had mixed success. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.